Nix Lynn Ullrich is a video editor who worked at Nickelodeon and even worked on TV shows that a lot of us grew up watching, like Blue's Clues, Spongebob, and Loud House. In this conversation, we discuss how Nix never intended to become a video editor, but also about the power of perseverance and how just dedicating to a goal can really change your life.
I learned the very, very basics of editing and absolutely fell in love with it.
What do you think is the importance of networking in our career?
But you never know who you're going to meet through YouTube editing, especially now that Nickelodeon is going to YouTube. So there is opportunities for that.
Talking to someone here that works at Nick, but I genuinely am curious, just as a person. Have you by any chance seen Quiet on Set? So I do want to start this conversation by asking you, given that the work that you currently do now, how is it that you started getting into video editing? And then what was your path like leading to the current job you have now at Viacom or Nickelodeon, if you will?
So I think I have a very interesting story. I actually never wanted to be an editor when I was really little. I've always loved watching TV and movies with my family, but never saw it as an actual career or even a hobby or anything like that. Both my parents were in the medical fields. My mom's a nurse practitioner and my dad's a paramedic. So I always was more drawn to medical and actually wanted to be a veterinarian for the longest time. It wasn't until I took a video production class my senior year of high school. And so I was just like, well, I like this one teacher, so he has this class, I'll take this. Whole mind blown, world changed. Everything just completely flipped in my life because I learned Adobe Premiere. I learned the very, very basics of editing and absolutely fell in love with it. So my whole life just kind of changed. I was just like, okay, do I want to do this or do I want to still be a veterinarian? And I had to figure it out. So I started looking at colleges that offered both, and I was just like, I will figure it out eventually. And I went to a private liberal arts school in Pennsylvania. And basically, they had video production classes, but mainly their film, their film degree was film theory, film study. I don't really care about film theory or film study. Yes, it's important, but I wanted to create. I wanted to sit behind a computer the rest of my life and just edit away. And my school, unfortunately, wasn't going to get me where I wanted to go. Within the first year I was there, I had finished all the film production classes. I was talking to the dean, I was talking to teachers and seeing, hey, can I kind of create my own major? Can I kind of make it more film production, like heavy film production based and not film theory? And they're just like, no, that's not what we do. That's not what we offer. And then I realized, well, I have to leave then. And I started applying to schools. I fell in love with two main ones. One was out here where I currently am in California, and the other was in Boston, Massachusetts. And I'm from the East Coast. I was born and raised in Maryland, so of course my parents were just like, please go to Massachusetts, please stay on the East Coast. And as soon as I got the acceptance letter to my school out here in California, I got so excited. I said goodbye to all my friends and I packed up and I flew out here with my dad, and I've been out here ever since. And basically, I just took all the classes I needed to. I learned a lot more. We had actual instructors that were editors, so they kind of gave us some good tips and tricks, but also gave us real world knowledge too, which was really nice. And from there, I just worked with everybody I could. I got a few internships. One of them landed me an actual job at a post-production house. And then that's kind of when the dominoes started falling over for me. Because at that post-production house, I met somebody who, through networks getting bought out and sold and everything, got my foot in the door at Viacom. And there I met people who were able to get me into Nickelodeon. And there I got into my current job right now, which is working still for Nickelodeon, but also working for Nick News. It was a very long, weird road, and I love how it started out not even thinking like this was an option, and now it's just like, this is all I want to do. So it was, yeah. So I think I have a very unique story that's just like, oh yeah, I didn't even want to do this, but now I am.
Now, with the fact that you work at Viacom, but then also Nickelodeon, and then you said that you specifically work on something called Nick News. In case no one knows what that is, could we know more about what it is that you do and what your job entails?
Yeah, so it's a little awkward right now because Nick News actually was our linear show was canceled. We were doing one 30-minute episode once a month. And basically, it's kind of what it sounds like, Nick News. It's Nickelodeon news for kids. So we would cover a bunch of awesome topics. Basically, we were covering recently in our last episode that we did, we were covering schools that are falling apart, basically. We called it Crumbling Schools. And we went out and shot a bunch of footage. We talked to a bunch of kids there. We covered another, such a beautiful story. There were these engineers, student engineers, and they created a 3D printed hand for one of their students that didn't have a hand. And then their teacher actually found this dog, such a cute dog named Panda, that didn't have front legs, and the students worked together and basically created a harness with wheels on it so the dog could walk. And funny enough, it was actually at the high school that Taylor Swift went to, apparently. So when we went there, there was a whole bunch of Taylor Swift memorabilia all over the walls, and that was so cool because it's high schoolers and these kids that they're just like, we want to be engineers, and they did this and they created it and it worked, and it was so cool like to see the hand like it's functioning like normal. We actually have footage of the kid playing catch basically with just a ball and catching it no problem, and it's amazing that it's kid made. And stories like that you usually don't get noticed to the world, but what we did is we found it, we went out there, we filmed it, we cut it down really quickly. So we had multiple segments within each episode and we shared it out to the world.
No, that's awesome. I didn't even know that that was a thing. And I thought I kept up to date pretty well with a lot of the shows, but I've never heard of this. But to be fair, I also just don't watch Nickelodeon as often anymore, but I'm still someone that did, grow up watching it, especially a lot of the cartoons. But that's amazing to hear about the kind of work you've done. Cause yeah, I agree. It's one of those things that it's like very specific. Like I guess you could say it's kind of niche, but like that doesn't mean that the stories aren't worth telling. It's just not as, I guess, big as some other news of like Taylor Swift being at a football game, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. We were just doing this linear. So we were trying to, and we're still in the process of trying to figure out how to get it all switched over to digital. So that way we do get more views on that and just kind of blast out a lot shorter segments, kind of like a minute segment long. Kind of, we're going to start cutting stuff for TikTok, and hopefully that kind of takes off. So that way there is more out there and people can see it more and realize, oh wow, this is interesting. And in your case, you didn't know Nickelodeon was doing this. Hopefully we get more people who don't know Nickelodeon is doing this and we get more viewership that way.
So when you then started at Viacom, and then obviously through Nick, has this been like the main thing that you've worked on then, or have you delved into anything else?
It's been a lot of random shows and projects here and there. That Nick News was kind of the biggest one, but I started that about a year ago. Before then, the reason I did get into Viacom was I was originally doing some work for Bellator. It's an MMA, and they got bought out by Showtime, and Showtime kind of feeds through Viacom and Paramount. So that's how I got my foot in the door, just doing some edits for that. And that was pretty much just kind of cutting out commercial blacks, kind of cutting out promos, getting it ready for online streaming sites. And there I met a bunch of people and basically gave them my name and kind of was just like, hey, here's my resume in case you need me. And it started out just doing kind of credit builds for random shows. I did some work for Awesome TV or Awesomeness TV. And then the kind of big break to get my name into Nickelodeon was Blue's Clues and You. They did a nursery rhyme YouTube series. We did, I want to say, like 52 songs. Just your classic nursery rhymes. And we did animation for it. So you had Blues and you had the whole crew. And it was so cute to work on. But we did that for YouTube. And that's how I met a lot of people within Nickelodeon, within the animation team. And that kind of started that trend, working with like the YouTube series animation stuff. Then I also worked on some Loud House and Spongebob stuff as well. Every now and then they'll do a specials episode, and basically it's kind of like SpongeBob and Patrick looking back at old things. So we'll take like clips from old episodes and kind of use those with some new animation, be like, oh, remember this day we did this, and it's like a cut back to this old episode and stuff like that. Same thing with Loud House, just random kind of clip episodes, and I did a lot of work for those. And those were really fun because then I got to write on my resume as like SpongeBob SquarePants.
That's actually part of one of my goals in life. I'm not going to say that if it never happens, I'll be upset because I'm still doing what I love and I'm blessed for that. But yeah, my goal is to one day, same thing, just get my name on like one thing that either I grew up watching or just genuinely love. So hearing that you managed to do that, like, I don't know, I weirdly want to say I'm proud of you, but also just congrats. Like,
Thank
because
you.
I get it. I know how special that can be, or at least that's how I feel, that it's like pretty special. But one thing that I noticed that you've mentioned is it seems like with a lot of the work that you have gotten then, it's kind of been through an introductory process of you introducing yourself, passing out a resume, but then also it just sounds like making friends along the way has also helped. Like, what do you think is the importance of networking in our career? Because personally, I think it's very important, but how has your experience been with that?
It's definitely important. You never know who you meet that might be that next job opportunity. For instance, the reason I got into Paramount in the first place was through Brad. I was working with him and doing the Bellator edits. And when he first showed up to the post-production house I was working at, my boss was like, "Hey, go in there, just do the edits. He'll tell you what to do. He'll buy you lunch. Have fun." And I was just like, "Oh, free lunch. Nice." Wasn't expecting really anything out of it. The first maybe 2 or 3 edits were kind of a little awkward because I was like, I've never met this person before. I'm in a room with them. It's just like now the nerves are coming out because he's sitting behind me watching me do these edits. And then after a while, we just started chit-chatting, talking about life. He was telling me about his history in the industry. But when thinking back to those sessions, I never imagined, I never thought that that would be the first domino to fall. And it was. But it wasn't for a while later because after I left that job and I started doing tours with heavy metal bands and doing like their vlog work. So I was recording their concerts, recording behind the scenes stuff, kind of putting quick edits together all while on tour and traveling throughout the country. And I did that for a while. When I finally came back home and kind of settled down, I was like, okay, I'm done with that. And one day Brad calls me up and he's just like, hey, are you busy? Are you working on anything? And not to sound desperate, but I was just like, no, not really. Why? What's up? And basically he told me that Bellator was originally part of Electus, got bought out by Showtime. Now they're going to be going down to Viacom building and he needed an editor. So he's like, do you want to come back and start doing this with me? And I said, absolutely, yes. And that's how I got in. And it was somebody that I had some lunches with, somebody that I was talking with sometimes. I never thought it was going to be an opportunity for anything bigger. And the fact that when this change happened and he had to go to Viacom and he now couldn't go through the post house and he needed an editor to bring with him, he instantly was just like, hey, I remember Nix. I remember having lunch with her and talking with her, and he brought me in. And that was just an amazing opportunity, and it opened so many doors for me. I kind of tested the waters a little bit. I kind of waited a little bit, kind of had nice conversations with people, just casual conversations. And then eventually, once I figured out who to talk to, that's when I started saying, like, hey, do you need editors? Do you guys hire freelance editors? Here's my resume, all that kind of stuff. And then just slowly got jobs through that. And then next thing I know, it started blowing up and my name became well known through Viacom and then through Nickelodeon. And next thing I know, people are reaching out to me like, hey, can you work on the KCAs? Hey, can you work on these? Hey, can you work on this show? And stuff like that. And basically, I was just like, yes, please, I want them all.
That's actually really cool, given that, yeah, it came about from just someone that you've had lunch with, like you said, worked a little bit with. One thing I am curious about is, all right, so you've met this person, you've done a little bit of work. Now, when I spoke to Andy Young, he works over at Warner Brothers. He had told me that when it comes to doing a lot of this kind of work and you want to get into it, because he originally started on YouTube, found his footing, eventually led to Warner Brothers, but when you want to start, like let's use me as an example. Like I have no technically no experience in editing any content that is related to like kind of the media that you work on, right? But how does one like myself, someone that has no college degree, I just have just years of experience, even get these kind of opportunities if I don't even have hours, so to speak, like the roster, I think it's called, like hours for the roster to even get into something that like what you're working on? Like how does one even find their footing through that?
Basically, it's if you know the right people, and unfortunately, it is hard to know who is going to be the right person or not, but you never know who you're going to meet through YouTube editing, especially now that Nickelodeon is going to YouTube. There is a lot of stuff on YouTube right now. A lot of big networks are trying to make shorter videos, shorter clips. So Nickelodeon, Disney, a lot of that stuff, they realize now that a lot of their viewership, a lot of their audience, which is going to be children, are on TikTok. They're on Instagram Reels, they're on YouTube. They're obsessed with YouTube Shorts and just I could just scroll through Instagram Reels for hours and realize that hours passed by and I was just like, "Oh crap." So they realize now that their viewership is there. So there is opportunities for that. And they're going to while they are going to keep the people that they have and kind of try to adjust their crew to go more into a digital basis, they're also going to be looking out for people who are already doing this stuff. So something like the fact that you're already big on YouTube, you're already editing a lot of YouTube videos, that does help you get noticed that way. And then vice versa, if you apply to jobs and stuff like that, or if you reach out to people on LinkedIn and stuff like that, the fact that you have digital, you have YouTube on your background, that helps more than you don't need to show how many hours you've worked because you have the experience already. You have the viewership, you have like large trending videos, and that's what's going to speak the volumes is just that you didn't give up, but you kept going after it. You kept working for things, and then you have some videos that speak for themselves basically.
Yeah, I've always wondered about that because that's what I was talking to Andy about is like, how does someone like myself, because there's a lot of people like me out there, I'm sure, that we have years. Like, I happen to have 15 years, not that all of them were professional, but I've been in YouTube for that long. And with all the experience I've gained and all the editing experience as well, how does one, even for someone who's only worked like a year or two, like do those skills matter? Or what would Nickelodeon even look at to even consider hiring someone like me? Like would they say, great, you've done a lot of work, but you haven't done animation or you haven't worked on, I don't know, something similar to what we're doing? Like I just always wondered what in specific might be the thing that prevents some of us that are YouTube editors to be able to work on content like that. Not saying that you have the answer. It's more just that's one of those questions I've always wondered about. But what do you think you have any answers for that or?
I don't think there'd be anything really holding you back because the fact that you're editing is speaks the volumes. The fact that you know what you're doing, you have the experience. So somebody that is a YouTube editor, I would say just keep working, hone your skills, and, you know, reach out to people, reach out to connects, apply for jobs, stuff like that.
So for Nick News, then, since you've worked on that show and you guys seem to share a lot of amazing stories, can we know a little bit of like what a regular day to day experience is like for you? Like, how is it that, or how do you guys work on these shows, and what software do you use? Are you guys like on Adobe, Avid? Yeah, just what's a normal day for you on working on the show?
Yeah, so it all kind of depends. Usually, it depends on if it's a shoot day or if it's just going to be a straightforward edit day. When we do have shoots, a lot of times I'll do a lot of the AE work as well. And that'll be like transcoding the footage, converting it to ProRes, stuff like that, getting it prepped. And then when the edit actually starts, it's a process of, we've had some segments start editing and get locked within a few days. We've had some take, I think the longest one was like 20 days or something that we were working on the same segment. And then there's also, we would do Nick News breaks, and those were very quick 1 minute segments that usually had 3 or 4 topics. And those were my bread and butter. And basically, what we would do is that was very quick, rapid turnaround. We would get the script Tuesday afternoon, we'd shoot Wednesday morning, and we would deliver to network by Friday, and it would air that weekend. So those were the most fun I had because the way we originally did them was all voiceover. So I'd get the script and the voiceover usually like Tuesday afternoon, and then I would just have to use like Getty pools, graphics, stuff like that. A lot of the graphics I would make myself. Last season, we decided to revamp Nick News completely. So we had a whole new graphics package, new images, all that. But with the Nick News breaks, we would do an actual host. And we would have, usually it's like a known influencer that we would work with, and we'd have them on the green screen so that way we actually had somebody to see. You had a face to look at, not just this voice randomly out there. And those were more fun because now I have more room to play around with stuff, because not only am I just trying to cover the whole screen, now I have a host, and a lot of times we'd give them props, stuff like that. So those were very fun, quick, rapid turnarounds. For the actual shows, though, we would be working on them for usually like the month before it airs. We're working on the show the whole time. We're trying to figure out what segments to put together because we wanted every episode to kind of feel seamless. We'd have 3 different blocks. So we'd have an A block, a B block, and a C block. Pretty much we'd have like similar topics in each block. And a lot of times the topics were really cool and amazing. We covered a lot of very interesting stories, and it was all done by our crew. So we would pitch an idea, create the script. If it was a scripted shoot, we'd create the script for it. But a lot of times we would go out to location and film everything and then bring it all together. And you edit, so you know when you get the footage originally, you've got hundreds of hours of footage that you have to create into a very quick 3-minute segment. So the editing process was very long and detailed, but it always came out really well because it was a lot of rapid cutting, a lot of good graphics, stuff like that, because we had to also keep children's interest in this because, if we're telling a story about how ads are sneaky, so basically how ads kind of are convincing you to buy stuff, what ads are for. But throughout the whole thing, we had to keep cutting to, we made this fake product called Slimeade, and obviously Nickelodeon, so it has to be slime related. And we had to keep the children's attention because, they're watching this, but at the same time, it's just like we had awesome graphics, and we made like little fake commercials from it, and it was always really cool. And it was a really good it's a really good show to work on because it was really interesting and it was doing a good thing. It was basically teaching kids like, hey, this is what's going on in the world right now. Like this is happening in the world. And it just does suck that it did get canceled and that also not a lot of people knew about it.
Hearing how kind of like, all of this is made and done, this makes me wonder then, and this is speaking both for you and your experience at Nickelodeon, but then also as someone who is an editor in general, how important is the collaboration process then in this industry, especially with the line of work you do? Because everything you're telling me, I'm thinking about graphics, the editing. You said that you do some of the AE work, which for those of you that don't know, that's assistant editor. So like with a lot of the work they have to do, how important is collaboration in your process?
Oh, it's definitely very important. Basically, until the show gets delivered, everybody kind of has a say on what happens. So we also have to run through, a lot of approvals and obviously through like legal and clearance and everything. But basically, when the show gets pitched or when the idea gets pitched, it goes through some execs already. It goes through producers. When it's shot, the producer is there the whole time. Everything's being recorded. We have to go through like everything that's said, all the interviews that's said gets transcribed. So that way legal has like copies of it. So that way we know like we can't use anything that they don't approve and stuff like that. When everything gets edited, now it's just based off of the editor and the producer, kind of go back and forth, create everything, kind of create the rough cut, and then that gets sent out to we call it the larger Nick group, but basically execs, legal, clearance, stuff like that, and everybody has their say of little notes and stuff like that. So it does go through a long process, and then when it goes into the final show build, so from this little segment into the final show build, that's when the lead editor, showrunner, they kind of look over it. They give their kind of little more notes and all too, and they kind of change some stuff up. Then the full show build goes out to the same large group. So the execs, legals, all that. And then sometimes we have little more notes there. So it goes through a long process. Everybody kind of has a say. Mainly, like, the notes are kind of like, hey, don't have this shot, or hey, let's blur this, like this building's face or this mailbox number or something like that. Those mainly the notes we get like from legal and clearance. But it definitely goes through a lot of people, and by the time it's done, it's flawless.
If you and the lead editor, or if you are the lead, then your assistant, what have you, since all of you guys are more on the creative aspect of these things, how much more, when I don't want to say power, but like, does your voice speak a little bit more than the other people that, let's just say, aren't as creative? But again, I don't want to put anyone down. Um, like, what if as an editor you're like, I understand you telling me to do this one thing, but I don't feel it's as strong without it, if that makes sense? Like, do you guys feel like there's a good balance of power there?
Yeah, there is. When it comes to like the segments, it's kind of like the producer's story, so they usually get the higher say. Then when it gets down to the lead editor, his name's Justin for Nick News, and if he wants to change something, then he'll kind of be like, hey, this is working a little bit better, let's do it this way instead. Then I know for the Nick News breaks, a lot of times that's more like my full control, which I do like. A lot of times I'll have, the producer kind of say, hey, let's do this instead. And usually it's something small or not too crazy, so I don't have any issues with it. I know it all kind of depends because I've had some jobs where I'm 100% a button pusher and don't feel like I have any creative freedom. And those jobs, while are fun, yes, kind of after a while kind of feel mundane and boring, kind of make you think like, do I really want to do this? But then you get those jobs or those projects where you basically have full freedom, full control, and those are the ones that I absolutely love. Those are the ones where 100% zone out. I'll be so focused on it that I don't realize that, the sun has gone down, I haven't eaten all day, stuff like that. Those are the ones I absolutely love.
No, that sounds great. I mean, like, I am really happy to hear that the collaboration is important, just because I'm just someone that, like, even though most of my work now is very dependent on me, my viewpoints on everything, I always admire collaboration a lot more, just because, like, I mean, I'm just being real. Like, I don't have all the best ideas in the world. Sometimes the graphics I'm thinking of making, maybe the color scheme's off, or maybe I just didn't do it right. Like, I love learning from people because I know I have a lot to learn. So hearing that you guys do kind of bounce around, I like it because I do think sometimes it does lead to a better product, but I don't want to also just take away the idea that, like, I like to think for the people that are usually doing this kind of work, I would trust them a little more on that. It would be like me saying, I want a certain paint for the studio, but if a painter's like, oh, we've worked on that kind of paint, it would be best to switch it to this. Like, I want to take their advice on it since they're the ones that do it. So I just always wondered how that works for you guys. So that's really cool to hear.
Yeah, definitely. And there's times too, especially when the one segment is being worked on for days upon days. There's times too that we'll randomly go to like another editor's bay and be like, "Hey, can I get your opinion on this, or can I get your eyes on this?" and stuff like that. There's one editor that did a lot of graphics too, and a lot of times I would just go to his bay and just be like, "Hey, I'm working on this graphic for the interstitials," and it was just like, how do you make yours look so good, basically, or stuff like that. So we definitely kind of work off of each other and kind of give each other notes, which does help too, because you said it yourself. It's just like, I know you know what you're doing, I know what I'm doing, but it doesn't hurt to get an extra set of eyes because they might be seeing something that you're not. Or they might have seen something before that was just like, hey, this might work better if you do something like this.
Yeah, good ideas can come from anywhere. The way I see it, like the amount of times even where my friends who don't do what we do every single day, they'll watch one of my videos and then they could just be like, "Oh, just so you know, like I had a hard time seeing that thing or that picture behind you. Like let's say it was this. They're like, "Can you just move it a little bit?" And I was like, "Yeah, why didn't I think of that?" Like sometimes it just comes out of nowhere. One thing that I really love though is because I talked on this before, especially in the YouTube sphere. I'm trying to make it a little bit more discussed on the importance of playing your team's strengths. So some people will ask me like, how involved should my editor be with what I make? And I always say he or she can be as involved as they want to be, because not every editor wants to be like recording with you. They don't want to see the pre-production. They just kind of want to do the editing. But the way I see it, and you already spoke on it, which is great, which is that because I am the editor, I can look at something even in real time and immediately start cutting it in my head. And I'll be like, maybe that's not how we should do it because I don't see how the graphic is going to come in smoothly now. Or you shot it like this. There's no space for me to move the camera, so I can't show a nice little graphic on screen. We're gonna have to like get a wider shot. So it's like you kind of just pick up on skills that you feel like you can share. But the last thing of the puzzle is just knowing when you can speak up. Because I like to think that you have to develop trust, whether that's with a YouTube creator or whether that's in the business. Because the business will develop the trust with you, I always feel, as long as you do what they feel is their best interest. But when they find that consistency in you, then if you're kind of like, hey, really quick, I have a better idea if we do it like this, I feel like they're going to be a little more open to hear from it because you're there talking to them in their best interest, not just I as a creative think this is the best way to do it. Because it takes me a while, or at least it did take me a while to feel a little bit more open to even talk about my ideas with Tom, which is the guy that I work with. His name is Thomas Frank. Not that Tom's a bad guy, but because I know that I'm being hired to edit the things that he wants. But over time, because we also developed a friendship, I just know like anytime he knows that I speak up, it isn't because he has bad ideas. It's just I have some ideas I want to run by you. And that's like a mix that now this video might be even better because he sees things differently than I do. But now we're mixing our skills together.
Yeah, definitely. It all depends too, like where you're working. So something like that, where you're working directly with Tom, that's kind of more beneficial for you because, like you said, you built the relationship and you feel more comfortable saying, like, hey, I have this idea. That was kind of the same situation with me and my friend when we were working on the student films. But once you do get into like the big companies, that's when, while you have an idea, so does everybody else too. So you're working with a larger group of people. Um, my main goal for me is, while I love working with Nickelodeon, I do want to work on, like the big TV shows and even movies. Like movies is kind of the end goal for me. And when it comes to stuff like that, that's when you start working closely with the director, and that I feel like that's going to be more the time where the editor kind of, it goes back to like those student films where the editor does get involved in the beginning process as well, and it's just basically just building the relationship. And regardless where you're at, you can build those relationships. You just got to figure out who to build it with and kind of when not to not overstep, basically, too.
It's definitely one of those things where it takes some time, but I feel like through enough experience, you just kind of know how to, I don't know, navigate those relationships that you start developing with people and who you can talk to or not. Or because, some people are a little bit more what I say goes. And then there's some people who's like, give me all the ideas you have and we'll find the best one, which I think is great. Now, over your time now, I would like to start closing things off with asking you about how do you then, with all the work that you've done till this day, how do you balance your work-life balance? Like, do you feel like you set your own limits? Do you make sure you don't work past a certain time? Because I feel like, for me, example, like this project is something I have to do on my free time, meaning I am working more, like almost every day I work more than 8 hours. I probably work 10 to 12, which isn't good. But I also do my best to stick to the times that I tell my family that I will be stopping. So, out of curiosity, how do you manage your time?
I feel like I manage it pretty well, but then again, I feel like there's also some times where, yes, I'll hit those like 12-hour days and feel like absolute crap the next day. I feel like it all depends on what projects you're working on and what all you're doing kind of work-wise and then free time-wise. Currently, right now, I feel like I have a really good balance on everything with Nick News and Nickelodeon stuff. It feels like it stays within the standard like 9 to 5 time range, and then once it hits 5 o'clock, I'm still available by phone. Sometimes I'll get an email at like 5:30, 6 o'clock, like, hey, can you do this quick edit real fast? And for me, that's no issues at all. If it comes in at like 2 in the morning, that's when it's just like, okay, that'll be tomorrow's job. There's definitely been other times earlier in my life and in my career that I definitely didn't have a good control on it just because of the amount of workload I was doing. It's definitely figuring it out, like based off of what projects you're working on. I would always say, like, take on as much work as you can, whether it's doing work and then doing side activities or side jobs and stuff like that, but always know your limits too. When I was in school, like there were when I was doing the tours, there were times where even working with Nickelodeon, I was working on like 2 or 3 shows at the same time. There were days I definitely felt overwhelmed. There were days I was definitely felt like, okay, at this time I need to just stop everything, turn phones off, turn all electronics off, and just kind of like sit on the couch and just kind of just decompress. Yes, decompress, definitely. There were days I was working multiple days in a row for the same project just because we had strict deadlines and things had to get done. But I always made sure I had a few hours every single day to just decompress, drink some water, eat some food, stuff like that. And while I did feel overwhelmed, I never felt throughout my entire career, I never felt like I overdid anything. I might have been stressed and it might have just been a lot on my plate at the moment, but I had a handle on everything. I had control of everything. And I feel like it's good to know your limits and what you can and can't handle, and just make sure that you're good, especially for your own health and mental health too. Because what people don't realize is like editing isn't quick and easy. You can do a shoot in like one whole day. You can get a whole bunch of footage and shoot in the whole day. But the thing is, when it comes to the editing, you have to review all of that you shot. So there's a whole day of just reviewing everything. And then you have to start editing it and cutting it down. And what people might not realize is the editing process takes a long time. It takes days.
Yeah, even with these videos and these talks, yours included, they normally take me like 20, 30 hours to make. So that's a lot of side time that I have to put into. And as much as I love doing it, I also know I can't do it every day. I can't afford to pay someone a fair rate so they can help me, meaning this all falls on me. So I just got to organize my time. And it takes a while. And even someone hearing that might really think like, really? It takes you like 20, 30 hours? Like, yeah, I review all the footage. Like all the motion graphics that are on my videos, I make by hand. Sometimes I use like a template, but even then I change the template. So I got to know how that template works so I can customize it. And all of that just takes so much more time than people would think. So while my videos may seem simple to make, I know how long they take to make. Hence why sometimes I am overworked or I know I'm working too much, but then that's when I set those boundaries, like we're saying. And I just think like it's easy from the outside to kind of expect editors to like click a button and then duh, it's done. And it's like, no, we're clicking 40 buttons like at a second to make sure that we're getting like even just a minute to look good. Like it takes a while. So I'm glad that you acknowledge also the burnouts that can happen, the mental strain that comes with all this, and it's taken its toll on me as well. But it's like I always say too, even on my worst days or like my most stressed days of the projects that I'm working on, they're better than doing anything else because this is just what I want to do. Now, I have to ask, this is going to be my final question, just because where I'm talking to someone here that works at Nick, but I genuinely am curious just as a person. Have you by any chance seen Quiet on Set?
So I knew this was going to come up. Yes. I watched it. I watched it when it came out, and I'm just happy to say I was not working in the industry during that time, and it is very shocking to see what has happened, and it's scary to think about it because you don't know if it is still happening now or not, and you don't really know like to the extent like was that just Nickelodeon base, was that just Dan Schneider base, is that everywhere? You hear a lot of names drop, especially during like the Me Too movement. We heard a lot of issues and corruption that happens in the industry, and unfortunately that is the reality that happened. And now I feel like it is, especially as a woman, I feel like there is a safer space to kind of come forward and talk about those things. So hopefully it's not happening as much. I know my own personal experience, I've never had to deal with something like that. I've dealt with a few men that will be condescending towards me, and there were a few times I did feel like maybe I was the honorary female hire at some of my jobs, but luckily I've never had to experience things like that, and I hope I never have to, and I hope nobody ever has to. And I feel like now the industry is getting better. I know personally, like when it comes to stuff that happens on sets and things that we shoot and things that go into our shows, legal is very strict about things. There were a few things that we didn't think were going to be an issue that legal was just like, hey, we're not going to do that. Stuff like that. To give an example, like we had a social bumper, and we had somebody that was cutting open some food packaging, and basically legal's like, hey, can we crop this and zoom in so that we don't even see the knife? Like we can understand and we can know that they're opening it, but let's just not even show the knife. So we did that. So from my own personal experience, I know that legal is, yeah, they're on top of their game, and they're making sure that there's not stuff that is going to be questionable or bad being shown on our show.
Yeah, and then in me in asking this isn't me trying to get you to say something bad about the company, and I'm also not even trying to pry. It's more just this is something that like look, I am just a viewer. Like, I'm going to be 30. I grew up watching a lot of the shows that unfortunately a lot of this happened in. But as someone who's even just a viewer, when I heard, because of how much I have love for like a lot of this stuff, it really hurt me. And it even got me concerned, where I'm like, wow, to think that stuff like this can happen in a place where you would see a show and you just think these kids and people are just having the time of their lives, but then unfortunately you have the ones that sneak in a lot of this crap, so in me asking you this, I'm just curious because you are a woman, and I want to acknowledge that, and I respect you for that, obviously. Like, you are a woman, you are an editor, which I also feel is already a concoction where sometimes maybe there are some unfairness that comes your way, but again, I wouldn't know that. And then lastly, the fact that you work there, I just want to know, like, how do you even feel? Like, are you comfortable knowing this history? And yeah, if it's gotten better over time, and obviously you weren't there since it's happened, but at your time there, I did want to know how your experience has been. So, you saying what you said already, I'm happy to hear it.
I definitely also feel like before I started working at Nickelodeon, I didn't really know the story, and I didn't really know the name Dan Schneider either. I didn't know. It wasn't really aired, I guess, or like national news, or if it was, like maybe my parents like kind of hid it from me or something. But when I started working in Nickelodeon, talking to coworkers and all, I started hearing the name more because I worked with people that had worked with him. And then when it did come out, I didn't. It was it was kind of like watching it. I didn't really know how to react. I was just kind of my jaw was just kind of down, and I was just like didn't realize how bad it was. And then I remember seeing some things from the shows like Zoe 101, iCarly, stuff like that. I remember watching those shows and thinking to myself, "Oh, that's weird, but yeah, that's funny." Or like, "Yeah, these kids are supposed to be like high schoolers, so like of course they're going to be wearing bikinis cuz it's hot out," or stuff like that. But then the way the documentary kind of was cut, it was showing like all those things back to back to back to back. And it's just like when you watch the show and you see it like one or two like here and there, it's not that big of a deal. But when you saw it back to back, it's just like, oh yeah, that is weird. And it does look like suggestible, and that's kind of when I was just like, oh, now I do remember, like, yeah, I remember seeing that, and it's just like, yeah, I could see that being very strange to be on a kid's show.
At the end of all this, it's just the fact that it really hurts. Again, just as someone who's on the outside and I have no say in it, the way a lot of the actors that had to go through that, it sucks to know that some of the shows that I really love are kind of tainted with that. Because how do you support, like, how do you separate the disaster of what really happened behind the scenes for a lot of this versus the joy that you actually had when you were oblivious to it, you know? Like, it stinks because, like, I would love to rewatch a lot of these shows. Like, I was actually interested in rewatching all of that. But after the documentary, I'm like, I want to support the people, but I don't like knowing now that that was going on. So it's just an internal struggle.
And the issue is like, yeah, I know there's stuff like that hidden within everything of kids shows and all. Like something like one main thing I know is like in Toy Story, there's a scene where Buzz is supposed to look like really silly and happy because he's got his teacup and like the hat's all like sideways and stuff, and he's like being all silly. And I remember watching that when I was a little kid, and I was like, "Huh, Buzz is silly, he's funny." And then you watch it later in life, and you're just like, "Oh no, he was drunk." And it's just like when you rewatch shows and like old cartoons and stuff like that, and like old movies, like Madagascar, there's a moment where he says sugar honey iced tea, like stuff like that. It's just like you think about it, it's just like I get it, like this is for kids and you're supposed to like throw these little things in there to kind of get the parents' attention and kind of like it's a little joke for the parents, but I there's a huge difference from it being like something like that in an animated series and something with having actual young children do these things.
Yep, that's exactly my thought too. Like, animation, you can kind of forgive it. It's fake, it's whatever. Not saying it's appropriate. It's just you're not actually using someone of that age, if that makes sense. Or whatever. So yeah, I agree. But no, all this is just it's just a conversation I was interested in having with you, especially given that you work there. I was just interested in your perspective. So I just want to say thank you for, being open at least and sharing a little bit of your thoughts, of course. But other than all this, because I've taken enough of your time now, and I want to thank you so much for everything. How can people find you? Like, do you have social media? Like, if someone wants to get a hold of you, what's the best way to do so?
Yeah, so I'm very big on like social media and everything. Basically, if you search my name, like Nix Lynn Ullrich, you'll find my LinkedIn, my website. Pretty much like if people want to get in contact with me and stuff like that, I would say like LinkedIn would be the best way to do it. I know my website has like a contact page, I think goes to my email, so that works too. But yeah, I'm pretty reachable, I guess I would say.
Okay. No, well, yeah, I appreciate that too. And I'll put everything, for those of you watching, I'll put everything in the description, and then I'll try to make sure I animate everything on screen so you guys can find her as well. But other than that, I really want to thank you for your time. And, if you guys like this episode and if you guys have any other follow up questions, please feel free to leave them down in the comment section. And if this video does well, maybe she can return and we can make a follow up.
Yeah, I'd love to.